Well, the interview is with Reverend Sam Matthews. And Reverend Matthews, why don't you begin? I know you were born about 1949, I guess, a little bit outside of Ackworth. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to grow up around County Line Road?
Yeah, I was born in 1949. My parents lived in Dallas, Dallas, Georgia. And I was born in Cartersville at the old Sam Howell Hospital.
Oh,
It's
okay.
a nursing home now, and my children tease me that I started there and I'll probably end up there at some point. My parents moved to Ackworth area in 1953
Okay.
on some land that my grandfather had owned, or still owned. It was a large farm, and a lot of it was taken when they did Lake Altoona. It was a floodplain, and they took a lot of the land, but still plenty to farm on. And my grandparents were farmers. I remember when I was a young fella, my grandfather's grocery list was coffee and sugar. Everything else he grew on the farm.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget the aroma of a smokehouse. I remember that.
Yeah.
We lived out there, County Line Road, but we came into town for school, and we came into town for church and shop, and Ackworth was home.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think there was something about you were a farmer in the summertime, maybe?
Yeah, we had a little garden, and my grandfather farmed in widespread, much more than we did. We just had a garden, and I remember walking behind my grandfather, plowing a mule. He was plowing a mule, I wasn't plowing a mule, and picking potatoes out of the dirt that they'd dug up, and helping him a little bit like that. And early mornings, there was a open land between his house and ours, a couple of acres, 2 or 3 acres there. And early morning in the summers, I would wake up to hear him gee and ha directing the mule down the pathway.
Yeah.
Lots of good memories about that.
Yeah. Did you ever think about being a farmer?
Never did. I picked some peas before with the bees all around, and had cousins who farmed, and they were hard workers. They were hard workers. I had great admiration for them, but never had any desire to do that whatsoever. My parents would not have stood for it. They insisted on education, I guess, to get away from the farm and move on.
Well, now, didn't Ackworth have its own school system at that time? I was just wondering why you weren't going to a county school where you were living.
I don't know if there was a county school out there near. We came into town. That was part of the county school system. I don't think it was independent.
Okay. Oh, I'm probably wrong about that then. Okay, so Ackworth was the school for
Yes.
the whole area.
Yeah, everybody out there came into Ackworth. And then later we went to North Cobb to high school. But that would not be true today.
Yeah. Any friction between city kids and country kids?
No, I thought about that. The fact that I'm talking about Ackworth, and I was not an Ackworth resident, but I was never aware of any friction, any of that whatsoever. We were received at the church and in the school and on the streets and shops and things. Never any distinction made whatsoever. It's part of the warmth and the ambience of Ackworth, I think.
I know you made a comment in the pre-interview questionnaire about, I guess, things were what they were, and you didn't know everybody in Ackworth.
No, we didn't. We didn't know people, quote unquote, across the tracks. And I regret that. But again, it's where we were, and we were a product of our times, I guess. And I was talking with Betsy Lewis Brown before I came in here, and we feel like we missed a lot. We feel like we missed a large portion of what life should have been like in those days. The schools were integrated I graduated from high school in '67. The schools were integrated right before that.
Yeah.
Just a handful, 3, 4, 5 black kids came to North Cobb, and they were received warmly. There were no problems. They played sports with us and whatever. Looking back on it, I wish I'd known them better. They were remarkable young people to do what they did.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we ever acknowledged that with them or to them.
Right.
And there's some regrets right there about who we didn't know in Ackworth.
Sure. Uh, can you talk a little bit about you remember any of the teachers, the principal? Who was the principal when you were going through?
T.C. Cantrell was the principal, and he had children in the school system whom we knew and still have contact with from time to time. Before that was Paul Sprayberry. Paul Sprayberry was a principal of the school, and then he went on into administration and served as county school superintendent. And Sprayberry High School in Marietta is named for him. Then Joe Hayes came. Mr. Hayes was a remarkable man. He recruited a lot of teachers from Alabama. He was from Alabama, I think. And a lot of his faculty came from Alabama, and it was a marvelous time to be at Ackworth. He had a great school, a great faculty, and some of those teachers I still stay in contact with. One of the constant teachers was the basketball coach also, Bill Blocker. Bill Blocker also worked at the post office, but he was a seventh grade science teacher and a remarkable man who took a real interest in teenage boys. He was open. He'd let you ask questions that you didn't want to ask your parents. He took a group of us to play golf 2 or 3 times in after school, and was interested in our development. Just kept up with us. He always visited the churches that I served, and then when I came to Marietta in 2003, he drove to Marietta every Sunday to worship with us as long as he could. And then I had the honor of speaking at his funeral when he died a few years ago. Bill Blocker was a real influence in my life, and I think the influence of all the young kids who came through his school.
Wow.
Another one that I'll mention was Philip Roebuck. Roebuck and his wife Winona were here in town, and they were members of the Methodist Church here in town. When I came to Marietta, after I came in 2003, they came down and joined First Church Marietta, and we renewed a friendship. And sadly, I did both of their funerals a few years back. She died first, and then he died last year. But just, again, remarkable people who took an interest in you, who knew your first name. They knew who your brother was. They knew who your sister was. They knew your dog's name. Unfortunately, they knew your parents, too. They knew your parents' phone numbers. And whatever happened at school, by the time you got home, your parents knew about it. If there was any misbehavior or whatever, they knew about it.
Yeah. You mentioned first name. I think you found out somewhere along the line you were named for Sam Jones.
Yes. Sam Jones, the great evangelist, came through Bartow, Cherokee counties at the end of the 19th century, served a church up there and did revivals up there. And my great-grandparents heard him and became Methodists. They left the Presbyterian Church and became Methodists. When my grandfather was born, he was named William Fitzhugh Lee Ruff. And his older brother John didn't like William, and he didn't like Fitzhugh Lee. But he liked that preacher that they'd had, that preacher named Sam. And so he called my grandfather Sam, and all of his life he was W.F. Sam Ruff.
Wow.
And when Mother named me for him in 1949, she named me Samuel Ruff Matthews. And I was 50 years old before I learned I'd been named indirectly for the great evangelist.
They didn't tell you that?
Nobody ever told me. They just assumed I knew.
Oh.
I took some of my family members to task for that, and they said, "We thought you knew. We thought you knew."
That's a big assumption.
Yes, it is. Yes, I still haven't forgiven some of them.
I was trying to think, you had a comment somewhere about some of the Ruffs, I believe, in your some of your write-up, or something that I saw about you. Could you talk a little bit about the Ruffs?
The ones that I knew, my grandfather, my grandmother, he was a farmer. He had 7 children. They grew up on the farm. They were in Bartow County for most of their lives, and then when my mother was 12, they bought land in Cobb County and moved to Cobb County.
Okay.
My grandmother wanted a place with water. She was tired of carrying water in a bucket up a hill, and they found the place out on County Line Road and lived there the rest of their lives.
Oh, I know where the Ruff, William Ruff's the one I wanted to ask
That's
you
right.
about. He was also at Marietta First United Methodist?
He served there for 3 years back in the day, in the late 60s. He was there for 3 years. He was a United Methodist minister.
Mm-hmm.
He was a superintendent, an assistant to the bishop. Probably should have been a bishop, but politics being what they were, he was never elected, but could have served in that capacity. Great churchman, and he grew up on the farm as well. He wasn't always honest with my mother and her sister. He would, she always tells the story that he would let them compete in picking cotton. And he would weigh the cotton at the end of the day, and he was going to pay the winner, but they always tied. And they figured out what was happening. One day they put some bricks in one of the bags, and they still tied. So they knew it was a scam. They knew it was a scam.
Did he have any influence on you going into the ministry?
Yes, some. But the people at the Ackworth Methodist Church and my parents had the greatest influence. They made church a pleasant place. When I went into that church, somebody said before me, there's a lot of difference in hearing "Hello, little boy" and hearing "Hello, Sammy."
Mm-hmm.
And on Sunday mornings from Paul Sprayberry and some others, I heard "Hello, Sammy." They knew my name, and they encouraged me. Later on, when I got into the church and had to deal with conflict of regular church conflict, I was surprised because I'd never experienced any conflict at Ackworth. I was
Really?
No. There was the church moved while I was there. It moved from downtown up to the present site. I have no idea if there was conflict or not. Who wanted to move and who didn't want to move. My parents shielded me, I guess, from that, and I was unaware of conflict in the church. But it certainly can happen. But of course, my parents put me in church. We were there every Sunday, no matter what. We were always there in church. And that was our social community as well for a large part of our lives. But the people of the church at Ackworth, warm and encouraging. And I spent 47 years in every church that I was in trying to recreate that atmosphere that was at Ackworth. I owe that church a great deal.
Wow. I wanted to ask you one follow-up on the African American community. There must have been some black tenant farmers around County Line Road, or maybe there weren't. Was it all white around there?
Yeah, very few blacks that I remember out there. Very few.
Well, well,
And I don't remember very much tenant farming at all by the time I came around. Early,
too late for that.
early
sure,
to the mid-50s.
Sure, by that,
Right,
after the Great Depression, it's
Right.
pretty much what came to an end.
Yeah.
Farmers were getting money from the federal government not to grow, and instead of where they'd had tenant farmers in many cases.
Right.
So the African American population is almost entirely an urban population in this area by that time.
That's all that I knew. But I'm not an authority on what was going on
Yeah,
the socioeconomic scale in those days.
Yeah.
I don't know. But that was the black community that we knew was in town across the tracks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Horrible statement about a town across the tracks.
Right.
But it probably in those days, every town had an across the tracks or something like that.
And the across the tracks is mainly more parkland than anything right
Right.
now.
Oh, yeah. I think some wonderful things have been done over there.
Even though there's still a lot of African Americans living in Ackworth, they're not in that area at least.
Good. Good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see. You graduated from North Cobb High School.
That's right.
In
1967.
67. That was too early for Autry, I guess, wasn't it?
No, Autry opened in 65 or 66.
Okay.
And one of the first real jobs I had was working out there.
Oh.
And
And constructing the school.
constructing the school, carrying concrete blocks and doing all those sorts of things. It was a real education. I learned a lot about building. I learned a lot of new words working around those men. And it was quite an experience. I bought my first set of golf clubs that I still have. I bought them at the either Thrift City or Kmart across from the Big Chicken. And I bought my first car with money I earned there, a 1953 Ford.
How about that? Well,
I
that
don't
was a classic by that time. I guess.
I still have the golf clubs. I don't still have the
Don't
car, thankfully. Thankfully. But yeah, and then Autry came along. Kermit Keenum was the first principal of Autry. I think he went there at 27 years old. And Kermit joined the church at First Church, Marietta,
did he?
and have gotten to be friends with him.
Well, he was a country boy before he came.
Yes, he
here.
was. Oh, Mississippi. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
He his little autobiography he wrote, I think, is from sharecropper to stockholder or something like that.
Yeah.
A tremendous story and a tremendous man.
I could have told you at one time what the title
Yeah.
of his autobiography was, but that sounds good. And so 67, and then you went to Piedmont College.
I went to University of Georgia first and was there for a while, and then I took a church up in North Georgia, up above Cumming, and finished at Piedmont, and then went to Emory for my divinity degree, master's degree, and then to Columbia Seminary out in Decatur, the
Okay.
Presbyterian Seminary.
So yeah, I was going to ask you about that too. But so in the United Methodist Church, you could take a church before you had your.
Student appointments, little small churches here and there, and those people were wonderful people. They put up with seminary students learning to preach.
Because it was a country church, and so
They
so you
couldn't
didn't have to
afford-
have your Master of Divinity.
No,
and-
not to get. You had to be working on it, but
Oh.
you could get a student appointment. And oh my goodness, my first church, I remember I covered the 10 Commandments in 2 Sundays, and you just learned to preach. You just learned to preach, and I was fortunate. Those churches were very, very patient, very kind. Of course, they didn't pay much money. They saved a lot, and but they were kind. And again, you learned to preach in places like that.
What, did you follow the lectionary, or did you?
I did. I learned early on. I liked the lectionary. Somebody said once, I don't think you should be told what to preach. And I said, well, you're not told what to preach. You're just preaching in concert with the Lutherans and the Presbyterians and the others close by. The lectionary is a creation of the church. People created the lectionary, but it's an attempt to tell the story of Christendom in 1 year. And wisely, it doesn't start with the birth of Christ. It begins 4 weeks early with anticipation of the birth of Christ and Advent. It's a great tool for teaching people. So many people say all the time, we're just tired of Christmas. By the time Christmas comes, we're tired of Christmas. That's because they haven't discovered Advent, the anticipation working forward. And a lot of education needs to be done in the churches about the seasons of the church.
Right. Well, it's a good way to learn the Bible too.
Yes, it is. The lectionary will ask you from time to time to preach on Scripture with which you're unfamiliar or uncomfortable, and that's good preaching. It requires some work. It requires some work.
Wow. So you were you had a church up there. So Piedmont was close. Was that the way?
Piedmont
it
was
went?
close, and I finished up there.
Well, our first president at Kennesaw, Horace Sturgis, got his degree from Piedmont.
I didn't realize that.
He was from, I guess
Demorest, Clarksville.
Ohio. I guess he was from Ohio, Indiana.
No.
Ohio, yeah. But he came. Well, wait a minute. He was up on near the Great Lakes, not too far from New York, so it had to be Ohio, I guess. But at any rate, he somehow or other he heard about Piedmont and came down here for school to Georgia.
And stayed.
And then became a teacher, and
He got Kennesaw Junior College off the ground and running, and I think they named their owl after him.
there was a Sturgis owl.
Sturgis owl out
That's
there,
right. That's right. And our library is the Sturgis, the main library on the Kennesaw campus is the Sturgis Library.
I did not know him. I knew his successor well, Betty Siegel, but I didn't know Dr. Sturgis.
Well, he was a Piedmont graduate, and
Gee, I didn't know that.
also our original athletic director, Speck Landrum, His
know that
family
name.
lived up there in Demarest, and he went to Piedmont.
It's a good area. I have friends up in Clarksville, and I love that area.
So you got a degree from there, and then to Emory for your MDiv
Right.
degree, and then I guess, was it years later that you did your DMin?
I finished seminary in 77, I think, and went
okay.
back to work on the doctorate in 87.
Okay, so it wasn't just a decade, I guess.
Yeah. But again, I'd had some time in the church, and I value that time in the church rather than going straight through.
So why Columbia instead of Candler?
Well, they did a program together, and I could have taken some courses at Candler, at Emory, with those. But I went out there primarily because of Walter Brueggemann, Old Testament professor.
Sure.
Probably, I think, maybe the eminent Old Testament scholar of the last part of the 20th century.
He's still going strong, I think.
I think he still writes. He was an incredible teacher. He changed our language and changed our understanding. He gave me the Old Testament. I was very unfamiliar with the Old Testament, and he gave me the Old Testament for my ministry, and I'm grateful for that. I've had a chance to tell him that and talk to him about that. I'm very grateful for that man, an incredible teacher. He interrupted a class one day. We'd been in class 4 or 5 weeks, and he said, "I think we're asking questions that we couldn't have asked 4 weeks ago." And he was right. A good teacher will do that. Will have you asking questions that you didn't even know were
Because
out
of
there.
some event.
Well, because of what we learned
I see.
about the about the Old Testament and how it
Uh-huh.
evolved, and the stories and what was there and what we needed to understand about it. And I think when a teacher can do that,
So you moved to a different level.
move to a different level of understanding the material. That's right. And I'm forever grateful to Walter Brueggemann.
Great.
My congregation has heard me quote him over and over and over, and Fred Craddock, a New Testament scholar. They've heard those two names. They know those names.
Right. Fantastic. Well, just talk briefly about some of the churches along the way before you got to Marietta First United Methodist.
I've been very fortunate. I've served a rich variety of churches. My first little church was Paces Ferry Church, where Mount Perrin Road dead ends into Paces Ferry.
about that. I want you to tell it. How many? There weren't very many.
Yeah, the
members
first
there.
morning there were 50 people on the roll. I think 49 people on the roll. And the first morning there were 6 people. And I asked Mrs. Allen, who ran the church, before I got there and while I was there, and I said, "Where is everybody?" She said, "Well, this is about everybody." And I didn't say anything, but we grew through the year. They were grading for Cumberland Mall in those days. And I would go to Ackworth. I would come here to eat lunch with my parents, and then I'd go back to Athens to school. And they would, "How many today?" Well, had 11 today, had 17 today, had 19 today. I didn't tell anybody, but I had a goal on Easter Sunday of 50 people. And we stood up to sing the first hymn. We had 48 people. I hadn't told anybody. And the front doors opened, and my mother and my father and my sister walked in, and we had 51. That was the first time I ever preached to more than we had on roll, I guess. Served a little circuit after that up in Cherokee and Forsyth counties, 2 churches. And there was a campground associated to one of them, Holbrook Campground. So it's a phenomenon that's in some ways it's outlived its use. I think it was protracted meetings at the end of the harvest season when crops were laid by and the farmers had time. They'd gather for the homecoming, for the camp meeting. And they had tents, buildings out all around the central arbor. And I got to experience that. I was an associate minister at Roswell in the large church there. Served twice down in Fayette County at a little rural church, and then went back later to First Church in Fayetteville. And served out in Gwinnett County, a church named for Bishop Cannon. And then I was happy in Fayetteville, would have been happy to live there for the rest of my life. And the bishop's office called and said he wants to talk to you about Marietta. And, of course, I was honored beyond words to be talked to about Marietta. And yes, I'm willing to come to Marietta. in our denomination, the bishop assigns the ministers. And I came and had 15 wonderful years at Marietta. 15 wonderful years.
That the church in Marietta had gone through, I guess, a controversy. I had to look it up. I didn't realize it was back in '99 that Charles Sineth.
Charles Sineth.
He left the church over same-sex marriage or something like that.
There was a chapel built, and I don't know, I wasn't there, but, I've heard some stories. The chapel out at Emory, they were afraid that they would allow same-sex marriage, and so they fanned the fumes, fanned the fires at Marietta, and some people left. 1,000 people left at one time, and then over the next 3 or 4 years, the aftershock, another 1,000 people left. So 2,000 people left.
Wow. How many were there before then?
Around 5,000.
5,000.
And that dropped it down to 3, or a little 2,500 or so.
Uh-huh.
And then slowly but surely, we built it back.
So how many were there when you came?
Probably 35 or so, 3,000, something like that. 3,000, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it had been built back.
Yeah.
And what we lost was a lot of young people. Older people don't change churches as much as younger people do.
Uh-huh.
And we lost a lot of our young people, young families. And so that's where we grew over the next few years.
You would think that young families, younger people would be more, liberal's not the word for it, but more open to same-sex marriage and what have you.
You'd think so.
But
You'd
that
think so.
wasn't
That
the
was
case.
maybe a little bit early. That was, what, a little over 20 years ago, and they weren't quite there yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The church now has grown very accepting. We have some same-sex couples in there. They weren't married here. The Methodist ministers still cannot perform those ceremonies.
Yeah.
But they participate in the church. They serve offices and hold positions
Yeah.
of significance in the church.
The United Methodist Church is still going through that problem, isn't it? With the
We
Mount
did
Bethel?
a crazy thing years ago. Our general conference of the church, which is the ruling body, responding to some of the social issues, put a statement in our beliefs that homosexuals were people of sacred worth, but self-avowed practicing homosexuals were not eligible to be ordained.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think we should have put it in then, and I don't think it should be in there now. We listed one behavior out of all of the behaviors that
Yeah.
might be possible. We listed that one. We didn't
That
say
one.
anything about child molesters. We didn't say anything about terrorists bombing buildings or whatever, but we chose that one behavior. And now the move, let's take that out, becomes so controversial. Once it's there, then to take it out is a major battle, and the church will be divided over that issue.
Yeah.
We were divided in 1848 over slavery.
Mm-hmm.
We became the Methodist Episcopal Church North and South,
Right.
and we'll be divided again,
Mm-hmm.
sadly.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a move to allow, just to take that out of the Book of Discipline and allow individual churches, individual members. Today, except for gay couples, I can marry anybody I want to marry or refuse to marry somebody. If I don't think a couple's ready or I don't think a
Yeah.
couple's serious, I can say no to that. And I wish that was still the case.
But you can't marry a gay couple?
Cannot. Methodist ministers cannot
Yeah.
perform that service.
Mm-hmm. You think that'll change in time?
The church will divide over that issue.
I see.
And there will be a part of the church that will allow that, I assume,
Mm-hmm. And part that won't.
and part that won't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why don't you just talk about those 15 years? You said you slowly built it up, and people were already coming back. It was
Yeah.
already growing a little bit.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that big an issue by the time you got there?
No, there was an interim minister, Joe Peabody, came in and did a wonderful job for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
There's a scene in Fiddler on the Roof where in the play where the townspeople are arguing. They've taken sides on an issue, a squabble between two farmers. And they've taken a side, and the rabbi says, people, let's sit down. And Joe Peabody came to the church. Joe died a couple of years ago. He was a good friend. Joe sort of said to the people, let's sit down and let's worship. A lot of the county and city leaders, state leaders, were in the church. Roy Barnes, former governor's in the church. Buddy Darden and Bob Barr, who both served in Congress, are in the church. Barr was the libertarian candidate for president a few years back. Bob's in the church. Steve Thunder Tumlin, the mayor, is there, and city council people. Betty Siegel, the president of Kennesaw State, was there. Excuse me, a number of council members and board members around town were there. And they were...
I know that Tim Lee was there because
Tim
the
Lee was
article
there.
that was in the paper just a few days ago.
Tim joined the church while I was there. Great, great man. And I enjoyed my friendship, my relationship with Tim. And his death was a great blow to me personally and to the community around us. I wish Tim could have been alive to see what has happened at Truist Park and the Battery and all that development. It's just been wonderful to see. Tim was a great, great leader. He was a leader in the church. He was chair of the finance committee when he was defeated for that election. Here again, a lot of those guys, and they were on different sides. They were Republicans and Democrats, and I always commended them in worship. You men and women, you have your differences outside, but when you come in here, they sat on the same pews. They served on the same committees. They went to the same Sunday school classes. Their children were in classes. Those divisions, different interpretations of the community and different interpretations of the law, never came into the worship services. And we talked about this a lot too, that there's a room for disagreement in the church. Go to a good Bible study, go to a good Sunday school class, and disagree about this interpretation of Scripture or this social issue or whatever. But then you join hands and walk into the sanctuary and worship together. And those differences don't matter in there. You're focused on something greater than yourself. I'm all for those classes who do that kind of discussion and capital punishment and same-sex marriage and all taxes and all those sorts of things. There's a place for it. But the worship service brings us together. I learned that at Ackworth.
Yeah, I guess so. I was going to ask whether it makes a difference in what you say from the pulpit when you've got so many powerful people sitting in the church.
You have to be careful. You have to be careful. You remember Michael Jordan, the great basketball player who made so much money selling those Michael Jordan shoes? They asked him once, why don't you take more social stands, political stands? He said, Republicans buy shoes too. And so you just realize you have people out there with different opinions and feelings, but when you talk about what Jesus said about kindness and warmth and hospitality and grace, there isn't anybody who isn't in favor of grace and hospitality. Nobody
One
can
would
be
hope.
opposed. You hope those things are true. And I never, I remember the first same-sex couple we took into the church. They joined on a Sunday when it was a big membership Sunday. And one of my members said to me, I just don't think I can worship with two gay men. And I said, well, you've been worshiping with them 2 years. They've been sitting 2 rows in front of you for 2 years. I didn't know that, he said. I didn't know that. Didn't know that. Didn't need to. Didn't need to. They were there for exactly the same reason he was there.
So they can join the church, they just can't.
They can't be married in the
Can't
church.
be married there.
Right, right.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a tough call for the church. It's a tough call, and we will divide.
Well, it is for every. Well, I know the Presbyterian church too.
Yeah, you all have been through your ordeal.
Yeah, and so that's true in a number of churches, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Surely is.
Well, you were there for 15 years, and then you came home one day and said it was time to give it up. Is that the way it worked?
People have always said you'll know when it's time. I was 68, and I was out in Denver visiting my son and spent a day on the phone out there talking to people in Marietta hiring a new music director. And when I got back that September, I just hit a wall. It was hard to get out of bed in the morning. everything I'd love to. People would say, "When are you going to retire?" And my response was, "I love what I do every day. I can't wait to get to the church. I think I'm doing the best work I've ever done. I've got the best staff I've ever worked with. Why would I not want to do this for a few more years?" And during that September, I just hit a wall and talked over with my wife. And we called our financial guy and said, "Can we retire?" And he sort of laughed. Yeah, if you don't buy anything, you can retire. And I called the bishop.
If you don't buy anything.
If you don't buy
can
anything,
retire.
you can afford to retire. So I called the bishop and told her, Bishop Sue, that our conference year is from July 1st to June 30th. I said, annual conference in June, I'm going to retire. And she had an unusual request. She wanted to know by the 1st of December what our plans were. Every minister, do you want to be considered for a move? Do you want to stay where you are? So I had to declare, and I knew it would be public if I declared. So I talked over with the leadership of the church, and the week after Thanksgiving, I told the church that I was going to retire, and they were again very supportive and encouraging. We had some time to say goodbye. And they said goodbye very warmly, and I have not participated in the church since.
Right. Well, now 15 years is a pretty long time in the Methodist Church, isn't it, to stay in one place?
It is. In larger churches, it's becoming more and more common. It takes a while to learn a community. I was fortunate. I came to Cobb County, and I knew the layout of the land. For the most part, I knew a lot of the people, at least by reputation, who were in the church. I knew who they were, and I knew some of the history, so I had a sort of a leg up. But it takes you a while to learn a community. It takes a while to be a real participant in the community. And the 15 years was about right.
Yeah. Well, I know you all have done a lot of good work at I used to talk occasionally at the ELM program,
Right.
for instance, that you turned over your facilities to
Several hundred people in there was it Tuesday or Thursday or whatever day it was, but they flooded in there, and then you taught some history classes, and they did all sorts of things in there. We were always grateful to have those people there.
Well, that was a good service to allow that program to be in there.
We had a good relationship. I guess they're still there. I don't know.
As far as I know, although with the pandemic,
I'm sure that
a
shut
lot of
things
stuff's
down.
been. I know I talked to a group by Zoom last spring, I guess.
Right.
So, yeah. 3 years now you've been retired. What have you been doing for the last 3 years?
Well, I read what I want to read, which is a change for me. I'm in a book club, so I have to. Sometimes I read what I have to read, but for the most part, I read what I want to read.
Right. Are you the only male in the book club?
Oh no! It's all male.
All male.
All male.
Okay.
Yeah. These are some. I always tell people everybody in the book club is smarter than I am. It's very intimidating. A very intimidating group. Both the past CEOs of Wellstar are in the book club. It's a daunting group of people, and when it's my turn to present, there's some pressure there.
Bernie Brown, is he one of them?
Bernie's not one of them.
Okay.
Reynolds Jennings is one, and Greg Simone is one.
Oh, yeah.
Those two are there.
Uh-huh.
Bernie's in the church. Bernie's a member of the church. I play a lot of golf. I play golf 3 days a week with a lot of friends. We have an established group. There, excuse me, there are 20 or so of us, and one of our guys takes on the responsibility of putting the groups together. Who wants to play this week? And he puts the groups together, and we play, and then we socialize with those people some too. It's a great group. And then I'm a great Braves fan, and during the season, I'm at Braves games.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that. I guess this was, what was the date? October 25th. You were featured in the Marietta Daily
They
Journal.
surprised me with that. They
along
called,
with your son.
They called, and they've done this before. I thought they were going to have 6 or 8 people talking about the Braves. So he started talking, and I said, I've been a Braves fan since 1957 and related some of the things I remembered about the Braves. They've been my team. I love baseball, and I love the Braves.
Warren Spahn, that
Oh,
era.
way all back in those days,
And Hank
57.
Aaron.
They won the World Series in 1957, and my brother and I fell in love with Eddie Matthews, the great third baseman.
Right.
There was a rumor in our family that at some point, some relative perhaps had played a little bit with the Atlanta Crackers, the minor league team. And so my brother and I just made the jump that it had to have been Eddie Matthews because he played here as a minor leaguer. And so we had to be related. We not related. He spelled his name with one T and lived on the other side of the country. But my brother and I laughed just before my brother died in 2017. We said to date nobody's ever proven that we're not related to Eddie Matthews. He was my hero. As I've said before in sermons and talking about him, unfortunately he was a better baseball person than he was a person, and a baseball player than a person. He had his faults, but we all do.
And that lack of a T, that just could have been,
Slip of the pen.
yeah, exactly. Same root.
Yeah. Surely we're related somewhere back there. And I've always wanted a season ticket. I thought that would have been a marvelous thing, but I just couldn't justify it. I worked hard while I worked,
Yeah.
and kept long hours and
Be
a lot of
staying up late for
night meetings and things. I just could not justify it. But when I retired, that was one of my gifts to myself. My wife won't go. I've gotten her to one ball game. She'll sit home and watch the game for a while, but the tension gets to her. But she'll text during the game. So we text back and forth and send pictures back and forth, but she won't go to the ballpark. But I met friends out
Well,
there.
the ballpark's moved out our way.
It's real close. I'm 30 minutes. I can leave my house and be in my seat in about 35 minutes.
That's good.
Yeah, it's a great thing. And then my connection to Tim Lee, when it was being built, he took me and Mike Plant, who was in charge of the development of the Battery. He and Mike Plant took my son and me and another friend through, and we had a great tour while it was being built. And I remember saying, I want to go down to home plate. And of course, there were trucks everywhere. You couldn't make sense out of everything, but there was a stick in the ground. And I said, this is it. This is home plate. And the guy who was in charge of it said, no. It'll be about 4 feet higher because we have to put in the pipes and things. They can take all the water that falls and suck it through and recycle it and use it. It's just a tremendous facility out there. So I go to Braves games. They played 81 games, and then they played 89 games this year at the ballpark, and I saw over 80, probably 82 or 83. I just enjoyed going out.
Were you able to get tickets for the World Series?
I did. I saw those games.
Okay. All right.
Very, very fortunate.
Well, maybe this would be a good segue to getting back to Ackworth again and growing up here and Little League Baseball and all of those things. Were you a good baseball player growing up?
In my mind, I was. In my mind, I was an all-star, bound for the Braves at some point. We Little League Baseball started here in 1960. And my father was one of those who got it going. It was
Oh, really? Not before 1960?
no, it was. I mean, there were little teams and leagues and whatnot,
not
but
Little League
official
Baseball.
Little League Baseball started in 1960. And my father was one of those who was instrumental in bringing it here.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Johnny Scroggs, who had a history in Ackworth and had played some pro ball. He had asthma, and that prevented him from going much farther along the way. But a good athlete, he was good with kids, and he taught baseball. He taught you how to play. We the first year we were a little mediocre team, but we were young, and the next year we won 18 games and didn't lose any. And when he died, I went up to the funeral home, and they had slides of pictures of the year, and that team was one of the slides, the little team that won 18 games. And some of those I still stay in contact with. Barry Davis is here in town, and Barry's been in city government, and he's a community leader. And Barry was on that team, and some others as well.
Wow.
Roy Fowler was on that team, and Roy ran Cobb County Water Department for a few years. So we had a good time, and I tell people I was a pretty good player until they started throwing curveballs, and then I decided I better do something else.
Did you play ball in high school at all?
I did. Played played on the baseball team. It was a good baseball team. In my junior year, I didn't contribute a lot. In my junior year, we played for a state championship down in Americus, Georgia. Didn't win it, but played for it. Several of those people played professionally or went to college. And I told somebody once I was a backup catcher, and I probably played in front of more scouts than anybody, but they never came to scout me. They came to scout this pitcher or that pitcher. And when I was warming somebody up, have him throw his curveball, have him throw that knuckleball, have him throw his fastball. And they were evaluating pitchers. And again, I just learned a lot about baseball and learned to appreciate it. And Johnny Scroggs was responsible for that, helping develop my love for baseball.
Great. Tell me about Christmas at Allen's 5 and 10.
We enjoyed going through. Hubert Allen was an enthusiastic vendor. And we would, every year we would walk through, and Allen's was a great place to go. Every toy in the world was there. It's where Henry's restaurant is now. You know, it's the divided restaurant. One side was household goods that we didn't care about at all, and the other side was all the toys and things. And Hubert Allen, Mr. Allen, would tell my dad every year, Paul, these boys need big bicycles this year. They need big bicycles. And I don't know what we had, but we were always on his side. We were hoping Daddy was listening, that he could talk to Santa Claus and we'd get the big bicycles. But yeah, Allen's was a great place.
And you had mentioned something about the churches getting together for Thanksgiving services.
Yeah, that was a treat, usually on the Wednesday night before. And
Which the Presbyterian?
you'd alternate,
church
the Presbyterian and the
Christian
Methodist,
church,
the Baptist, Christian church, everybody. And the Methodist preacher would read the scripture one year and he would preach the next year, and somebody else would have the prayer this year, and it rotated among the ministers and whatnot. I remember we had a new young minister named Mac Tribble at Ackworth, and everybody loved Mac to death, but he was he was a little much for some of the older people. He loved the Beatles. And some of the congregants had a hard time with the Beatles.
Okay.
And I remember he preached one year at the community service, and he started by reading a letter he had gotten from a young lady, Reverend Tribble, I'm pregnant. And my mother was outraged that he would say the word pregnant from the pulpit. She died in 2006 at 80 years old. I never heard the word pregnant. Somebody was that way.
Yeah.
That way. She's that way. And I'm sure some of the other elderly people thought it was right on the edge, just use the word pregnant from the pulpit. But he did. And again, Mac Tribble was one of those part of the formative people for me in theology and everything else as well. He was very encouraging to me. And just part of that church, part of that atmosphere of the church that I loved so dearly and tried to recreate for 47 years.
Wow. Well, you left blank the question that the Save Ackworth Foundation, Save Ackworth History Foundation asked you about whether there was anything about you that no one else knows until now. So I guess you're an open book.
Some writer wrote, ministers don't promise that we can live our lives any better than anybody else. We just promise that we'll live them publicly. And we do. There aren't a lot of secrets.
No secrets.
I did remind Betsy Lewis
Yeah.
that I was in her home New Year's Eve, 1960. I have no idea. I don't know why I remember something like that, but I remember looking down and writing down 1961, and somebody had already said, you can turn it upside down, and it's the same year, 1961. And I don't know if it was my parents' Sunday school or what it was. I don't remember if Betsy was there. But again, we kind of grew up together.
Yeah.
I was at her house.
Yeah.
That's about the only thing about me that's not known.
Okay. That you were at Betsy's house.
Betsy's house on New Year's Eve in 1960, but I don't know if Betsy was there. She was probably at a party somewhere.
Yeah. Well, how do you view the changes in Ackworth since you were growing up here? It's a little bit different nowadays, isn't it?
One moment characterizes the changes. Right after we came here, my wife had met some people, and one morning she's getting ready, and I said, "Where are you going?" She said, "I'm going up to Ackworth to eat lunch." You don't go to Ackworth to eat lunch, and we never, I mean, there was a Tasty Freeze in Johnson's, and that was it. I said, "Go to the Tasty Freeze or Johnson's? Where you go?" I had no idea what had happened to Ackworth. I'd driven through, passed through, but hadn't really appreciated what had happened in Ackworth. And it's a destination place. It had become that. And she knew that before I did. The changes are remarkable, and I have no idea if the town has been able to retain that small town ambiance. I don't know. I still look at the city councils and people like that, and the mayor, Tommy Allgood. I know that Butch Price is on the council. Some of those people were formative for me and would be able to do that. I suspect Allgood has been able to maintain a lot of that. I suspect that he has. He's a brilliant man. And but the changes, as I said before, I came in. It's the first time I think it was the first time I'd driven over the new bridge over the quote unquote the little dam, and then coming into town, you'd have to navigate all those orange barrels. This will be a great, like they said about the expressway. It'll be a great thing if they ever finish it. Ackworth will be a great town if they ever finish it.
All right. Well, I'm about out of questions. Is there anything that you'd like to add or talk about that we haven't?
No, except I do run into a lot of folks from Ackworth, an amazing number of people still connect in one way or another, still around. And from time to time, we have occasion to get together. And we say over and over and over how fortunate we were to grow up when we did, where we did. Again, it wasn't perfect. I mentioned we didn't know the people, half the people in town. But the ethics that we were taught at home were the same ethics we were taught at church and the same ones we were taught in the schools. And that kind of continuity made for a very safe environment for us. And I doubt if that's true for young people today. I doubt if that's true. We were very fortunate to grow up when we did, and we owe a great debt to the leaders of the community in those days. They saw to it that it was that way, that continuity. The principals in the schools chose teachers who were ethically solid and sound. Now, they were different. There were some challenges along the way, but by and large, the ethos of the community was consistent everywhere we went. And there's a great peace in that, and we grew up in that peace. And now that we're in our 60s and 70s and retired or whatever, we talk about that a great deal when we were together. Weren't we fortunate? And we were.
Well, we're doing this interview on the morning of the 6th game of the World Series. Any predictions for tonight?
Well, we were disappointed Sunday to not finish it in 5 games, but we're where we hoped to be. We said in the beginning, if we can split in Houston, take 2 out of 3 in Atlanta, then we just got to win one of the last 2. And that's where we hoped to be. So I'm very optimistic, very optimistic. We have our best 2 pitchers lined up, very optimistic.
All right. Well, we'll take that as a guarantee that.
Well, don't bet the rent money on it, but who knows?
Okay. Well, we'll hope for the best tonight.
Thank you for this, and thank you to the city for doing this and allowing me to talk about the city that I love.
Well, thank you for letting us interview you.
My pleasure.